Alright guys, welcome to F1 News. Day 2 of testing in Bahrain is done. So many more takeaways to get into today. Red Bull happy with their progress overnight, but not a great day today for Liam Lawson with the amount of laps that he got in. Hamilton early on topping the times, but Carlos Sainz in the Williams ends the day on top as he did last year in the Ferrari, let's not forget. But the most impressive run of the day, without too much doubt, went to Lando Norris in the McLaren. The race run he did towards the end of the day was unmatched by anyone. Is that a sign of things to come? Very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Plenty to start with. This was yesterday's day 1 comparison, 2024 versus 2025. The team that improved least year on year yesterday was the Red Bull. The team that improved most, by a country mile really, was the Mercedes. This shouldn't be a massive surprise. Last year's test for Merc was a bit of a shambles, and they still went on to actually win a handful of races last year. This year's Merc, to me, is like the sneaky under the radar car, because the Williams, like, it's getting gas. People are talking about the Williams because they're top in the timesheets and they were good yesterday as well. That's obviously a conversation we will have, but I think the team to watch that maybe isn't quite getting the discussion that they deserve right now potentially is the Mercedes, because the car does look just far more planted and consistent than last year's. Both Russell and Antonelli seem pretty happy with it. It may just not have the outright performance of its rivals, but that's definitely a conversation that we are going to have. As Russell even says, the new Merc is much more drivable than last year's car. He said, no doubt it's the best car they've ever had around Bahrain, certainly in recent years. Now, it must be noted, Bahrain has been rather unusually cold over the last few days. The weather conditions are not exactly what they may have expected. It was even raining today, can you believe it? So there definitely has been talk to the sense of, okay, maybe the Merc is having the same issues as last year, where in the cooler conditions it's fine, and it's not like the Merc's tyre deg on certain conditions seemed especially good, but that is also a major talking point. Now, yesterday was a big day from Helmut Marko. The guy was cooking after Red Bull's good day yesterday, certainly in Max Verstappen's hands in the evening. Today was not a particularly good day for Red Bull, and Marko was even saying yesterday that of the top teams, Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, the team that was most disappointing to him was the Ferrari. Now, the rumours were that Ferrari yesterday were just basically focused on getting the car to work. Today, as in the second day, was meant to be about more so performance runs in qualifying simulations, because last year's Ferrari was struggling in quali sims, right? That was where it has an issue, was last year's getting the tyre up to temperature. The race runs last year for Ferrari very strong, good car in race conditions, but switching it on for quali was a problem with the SF24, and it was the other way around, of course, famously in 2023. This year they want to strike the balance, and Ferrari, that's what they say anyway, that yesterday was purely a day to get everything working. Today, they were going to search for some performance, and performance, of course, they managed to find. But Marko was also saying that as of yesterday, McLaren and Mercedes have the strongest race pace apart from Red Bull. Max's stint yesterday in his race runs was the most impressive stint. Now, what we don't know is fuel load in the car, engine load in the car, various other factors as well. So we've got to take it with a pinch of salt. But Ferrari's times today was certainly a way off McLaren's in the long runs, but of course it may have been the other way around in the short run, so we're going to get into that in a second. So Helmut Marko was also saying the car is much more predictable, it reacts to changes as it should. The problems we had last year, in my opinion, have been largely resolved, or perhaps even completely solved. So big words from Red Bull yesterday, especially because, you know, a lot of the commentators at the track were saying that, well, Max went wide here, went wide there, wasn't ultra consistent, but Max felt like the car's just way better. Now, I guess the question is, what's Max comparing this car to? Is he comparing it to how he felt in the car this time last year? Because this time last year at Bahrain, the Red Bull was a rocket ship, let's not forget, and they went on to dominate the start of the season. But if he's comparing it to the car that finished last season, which was somewhat more up and down, then, you know, of course, you know, you might expect it to sound and seem a little bit better. But yeah, as Max says, everything felt good, only good surprises, that's a positive. We don't know yet where we are in terms of pace, but the car works well, and the car does everything that I want. So, you know, big words from Red Bull, and we'll see if that continues when Max is back in the car tomorrow, because Lawson did the whole day today and didn't really do all that much, to be honest, whereas Verstappen is back in the car all day tomorrow. So I think that's going to be the key testing point, because, you know, the Red Bull weren't really in the conversation today. They certainly were yesterday, and I think they are going to have a very good car this year. But also we know their front wing is very, very flexible, and after the 9th round of the season, they could get pegged back to some degree, or maybe it'll affect other teams worse. Who really knows? But Max is very happy about it. It seems he says, yeah, lots of positives. Compared to last year, the car is much more predictable. I guess the question is, though, that many of these cars are going to be more predictable. The Mercedes is more predictable, absolutely, than it was last year. But does it have the outright performance? That's a question that we don't know the answer to quite yet. But we are going to dive more into the long-run data today that we didn't really get too much of a chance to do yesterday. There were rumours as well, and there still are, that tomorrow Red Bull are going to have an upgrade, like a major upgrade on the car, which may make it look different visually than we were kind of expecting. But Pierre Wache says, no, that's not fully true. I think we have some new parts coming for day 3. It's not massively different. It was planned for Australia, the first race, but we tried to push it a little bit for day 3 here to give us a possibility to see whether that direction is correct or not. So again, that's pretty interesting from Red Bull. We'll see what they turn up with tomorrow. Now, before we get into some of the race run data, Hamilton was at the track today, turning up. I think he was the last to leave last night, and he was the first to arrive today. Notably, for the last 2 days, he's arriving in Ferrari gear. Now, usually he may arrive in something a little bit more, spectacular from a fashionista perspective, but I guess with Ferrari and the way that they do things and the sponsors and these things, that's probably going to be less permitted this year. Certainly Kim Wilmer made a video yesterday suggesting that was exactly how it was going to be. So thought that's interesting. And Hamilton maybe isn't especially happy about this, but it is what it is, I suppose, when you drive for Ferrari. But he did have the opportunity to continue his absolutely generational media run. Like, this guy is on smoke when it comes to building up the media hype and the attention going into this upcoming season. He did this piece with Time magazine, and he even said the following, right? You guys remember when Toto Wolff made the comments about the shelf life of Hamilton and other, great sportsmen, and Hamilton says this, far more fiery than I've heard him for a very long time. And I think it's interesting to see Hamilton with this level of energy and passion and ambition yet again, and making it very clear what he thinks of his detractors. At the end of the day, now it's time to deliver on the track, right? But this is what he says: don't ever compare me to anybody else. I'm the first and only black driver that's ever been in this sport. I am built different. I've been through a lot. I've had my own journey. You can't compare me to another 40-year-old, past or present, Formula 1 driver, because they are nothing like me. I'm hungry, driven, don't have a wife or kids. I'm focused on one thing, and that is winning. So, and he posted this. I don't think this is like a fake quote or anything, because he posted this on his socials. Maybe not this exact quote, but he was publishing the article. So, if he wasn't very happy about the way that they quoted him or something, then I'm sure he might have said something. But yeah, so Hamilton is coming into this season with a generational PR run, like all the media coverage around it. And I mean, it's been great for the sport. At the end of the day, as he says, he's here to win. That's his absolute full 100% focus and ambition. And he's here with Ferrari, and this may be his best opportunity this season to do exactly that. Time will tell whether he can execute on the track, but the signs of today were very promising, it's got to be said. Few highlights to go through from the session. It was raining early on. I mentioned this a couple of days ago, that it was forecast to rain today in Bahrain. Like, the whole reason really why they moved it from Barcelona to Bahrain was so they could get good, clean running in the sun all the time. But it has been cold, it has been cloudy, and at times it's even rained, to such an extent that Aston Martin and Haas, the two teams that actually did bring some wet tyres, were able to go out and do a couple of laps. But it didn't massively matter. Most teams were able to get out there, even on the slick rubber, and still get some decent lap times in. This was interesting. You guys may have noticed this during the day, but this was the back of the Ferrari. They were running asymmetric cooling vanes, as you guys can clearly tell, that on the left and the right, there is a serious asymmetry here. Like, this isn't just the camera angle. I'm sure that they're using different cooling setups on left and right. Very interesting. I guess it's a testing thing. I don't expect them to run this. I imagine they're seeing, I don't know, they probably have the data on which side it was being more effective on. Who knows? But yeah, not really seen much of that before. And this was when Hamilton was doing some really impressive lap times, as we'll get into. Now, Lawson spent quite a lot of time in the garage, and then they were like, all right, we're going to come back after lunch. Rumour had it that they were suffering from a loss of engine water pressure. Not really an ideal day for Red Bull, because I wanted to see what Lawson was going to do in terms of lap times, what his long run data was going to be, what his, one lap pace was going to be. And they didn't really get that much chance to show it today, to be honest. I think we'll see from Max tomorrow where the Red Bull actually is. But for Lawson's final day of the test, it wasn't really great. He only got 28 laps in the morning because of an issue with the Red Bull, so that's not ideal. And also not ideal for McLaren's front wing. I don't know what Oscar Piastri was doing here, to be honest, because Hülkenberg was trying to get out the way, and Piastri goes into this corner. Hülkenberg's trying to stay wide, so Piastri can just go up the inside. I'm sure he got like blocked if it was a quali lap or whatever. But yeah, Piastri just understeered. I think he felt that he was going to be able to turn the car, he couldn't. And he went into the side of Hülkenberg and slapped up his front wing and caused a bit of damage to it. It's not the end of the world, but the first car-to-car contact we have seen of the season. One other thing to note is this Mercedes rear wing. So as you guys can see, well, just have a look at the upper elements, basically, and how it moves between full load and braking. Now, it might not be incredibly noticeable, but I think if you look at some of the elements on the side, you guys can see that under braking, it clearly rises up quite a lot. So it's clearly a very flexible rear wing, and there was even some discussion that compared to the previously noted flexi wings of the last few seasons. Now, of course, the McLaren last year was flexing in these ways at the corners to get that mini DRS effect, which is not allowed, and that's not what Mercedes are doing, but they are allowing the rear wing to flex, probably more so. Like you can see by these two lines how much it will flex down when at high speeds to help reduce the drag and then flex up for the corners. So it's maybe one of the more flexible wings that we've actually seen of any team over the last few years, and that's on this year's Mercedes. And their front wing seems very flexible as well. So look, race 9, the rules change. We'll see what happens then. But all teams, not just Red Bull of course, are going to be affected by this. But the lap times were coming in thick and fast. Russell was the first man to get into the 1:29s, and then about 10 seconds later, Hamilton crossed the line and put in a 1:29.7, basically. Significantly faster, had a couple of tenths on Russell, and the car looked good. I think watching the Ferrari, it's interesting the onboards, because the car looks very planted. Hamilton going to be pretty smooth on the throttle and drive the car as he wants to, but it's still a little bit, I don't know, it seems a bit stiff at times. There is a tendency for it to understeer slightly, probably more so than a McLaren at corners like turn like 11, 12, round about there towards the end of the second sector into the start of the third sector. It seems maybe a little bit off where the McLaren sometimes is, but in terms of outright performance, I mean, it's doing everything, and it's, I mean, as I said yesterday, the traction out of the slow speed and the turning of the nose, very, very strong as well, and seems good under braking as well, of course, because, Hamilton likes a car that's good under braking, and he's not really had any issues with that over the last couple of days, whereas, let's say, Antonelli in the Mercedes is struggling more, certainly into turn 10 with the brakes. He's had plenty of lockups, Antonelli, over the last couple of days, but he's still been very fast. So the Ferrari today was definitely impressive. As they searched for more performance, I think Hamilton's lap time, certainly through like turn 1, 2, 3, I thought it was really, really mighty, the Ferrari, and probably better than anything I'd seen up until that point. And then a few laps later, so Hamilton put on another set of tyres, went out for a run, I think made a mistake somewhere, decided to go again, because I think this was on his second run on the C3s, so the C3, which is going to be the soft compound when we actually get to Bahrain, and he put in a 1:29.3, a really impressive lap time, and I think this was on his second run, so the tyres were giving up a little bit towards the end of the lap, but yeah, this was impressive, I thought, from Ferrari and from Hamilton, finding strength in the car, and topped the timesheets in the morning by a comfortable margin. Ended the morning session with a 1:29.3, Russell was 4 tenths back, Sainz was 7 tenths back. The conditions probably got a bit better, typically it cools down in the afternoon, allows you for more opportunities to go faster. To be fair, it was kind of cool the entire day, and Leclerc's time in the end was very similar to Hamilton's, but Hamilton's time really did stand the test of time. But as the day went on, Carlos Sainz came back out again and put in a 1:29.3. This was when Albon was on the broadcast, and it was great to watch Sainz's onboard. Now, look, Williams did say, yeah, we probably had lower fuel in the car, maybe higher engine modes than Ferrari did. But still, Sainz's time is notable for a couple of reasons here. Because last year's Williams, their qualifying time was in the 1:30s. So Sainz's time today in the Williams was near enough a second faster than the time that last year's Williams did in qualifying sims, or literally in qualifying, right, in today's simulations. And also for Hamilton, the time that Hamilton did and Sainz did was only a couple of tenths of last year's pole time. And Hamilton's time last year in quali with the Mercedes was slower than he did today in the Ferrari, like by a good couple of tenths. So it's notable how much faster these cars are going, how good the conditions have been on the track for testing, but also how comfortable Sainz is now in the Williams and how comfortable Hamilton seems to be getting in that Mercedes as well. Sainz did go for a spin slightly later on, as did Leclerc, as they started to put in some long-run information, and we're going to get into that right about now, because the long-run data is where many people's attention has turned today. This was a little bit of a simulation that Liam Lawson was doing on the hard, on the C2 and the C1 compounds. You can see times in, these are presumably higher fuel runs, but in, 35 dead, 34 high, something like that anyway, the kind of times that we were looking at this part of the day. And to be fair, the degradation looks pretty non-existent, which is impressive, but, you would expect this time of the regulations, the harder tyres, if they degrade, which they do, they degrade in line with fuel burn, and therefore you basically go the same speed. That's sometimes how it tends to go. We'll get to these numbers in a second. These were George Russell's stints in the morning, so on the C3 tyre, which is going to be the soft, so they can't do that many laps on it. And there was some deg. I mean, here he's doing a 32.5, 32.9, 32.8, 33.3. So there was some significant deg on that setup for the Mercedes. But later in the day, Antonelli's lap times were stronger, and Antonelli was putting in on the harder compound tyres roughly 33 high, 34 low, 34 dead, 33 high. That was pretty much where they were. And Charles Leclerc was very similar at the same time of the day. Lando Norris was doing a race run himself on the C2 tyre, and it was absolutely mega. So he did a very long stint on the C3. You guys can see the numbers for that. So George Russell's stint was faster, but the tyre degged more, whereas Lando went longer, but he was able to do more laps and went slower. He did a stint on the C1, which wasn't, that dissimilar to some of the other lap times that we have seen, 34 low, 34 mid, that kind of number. Not really any degradation on this either, per our understanding anyway. And as always, what are the fuel loads? What are the engine modes? We just don't know. But one would presume that these are on reasonably high fuel. This run, though, was the run that really turns the heads today. The C2 run that Lando put in on that slightly softer compound, and it will be the medium, the C2 compound, when we actually get to Bahrain in several weeks' time at this point, when we come back to this circuit for the actual Grand Prix. But it's a notable stint because, yeah, the C2 should be faster than the C1, but also it should deg more, so that should counteract things. But his lap times here were mighty. As I say, on maybe it was the C1 compounds, but on the C1 you had Leclerc and you had Antonelli doing 34 zeros, 33 highs. You had Lando on one step softer, but he was doing 32s. Like, it was pretty mega. Now, is the McLaren 2 seconds a lap faster than the Ferrari? Very, very unlikely that is true. But if there was anything that might strike a little bit of fear into the hearts of their rivals, it was this run today from the McLaren, because especially these laps, 32.3, 32.5, 32.3, 32.2, 32.8, 32.7, 7, 6, 7, and then a 33.4 to finish out the stint. That was pretty impressive. And just for example, comparing it to Leclerc's, he did some runs as well on these sets of tyres. The C1 run, which I was talking about, was 33 high, 34 low. The C2 run was maybe on different fuel loads, right, different time of the day. So it's tough to compare, but the bottom line is that Leclerc's run looked okay, looked pretty good, but was nowhere near where Lando was at pretty much a similar time on a different tyre. But Tony Sokolov, who does a lot of these analyses of the race runs, said this: I hope that Hamilton can have a better race sim tomorrow because this isn't good enough for Ferrari today, far off McLaren. So look, it's early days, and our understanding is that today, for Ferrari anyway, was a focus on the performance in the quali sims, which they seemed very strong at. Leclerc eventually put in a time very, basically the same pace as Hamilton later in the day. So they seem on a similar pace. Antonelli's fastest lap was just where Russell's fastest lap was. So there's lots of excitement, I think, for these teammate pairings. But equally, even this guy, Pablo, who runs the McLaren kind of social page here, obviously it's like a fan page, but he's obviously talking about McLaren things, and he may have some contacts among McLaren, who knows, but he says that I know we should move in silence, but I'm hearing very positive things, and these long runs are by far the best ones of the day. Same story as yesterday. So what are the appropriate takeaways? Who knows? As I say, in the morning session, Hamilton did some runs that were roughly half a second faster than the Red Bull and about 6.5 tenths faster than the Aston Martin, but and Mercedes was struggling. But then the afternoon, it seemed like a bit of a different story. Antonelli's times seem to be pretty consistent. So who knows, right? It's obviously setup changes and everything. The takeaways are somewhat unclear. And just to close out with here, this is what Tony Sokolov actually put together with Antonelli's stints in there as well. So I'll leave you guys with this on the day. Sainz ends the day with the fastest time, then Hamilton, then Leclerc, then it was the Mercedes guys, and everyone else was nowhere near in terms of one lap pace, really. And it's not like the McLaren was rapid in single lap performance today, but it was obviously the long run data that was impressive. So yeah, tough to have too many takeaways after the second day of testing. If there's any car, in my opinion, that has an advantage right now, I think it's the McLaren. The Red Bull also may, but we didn't see much of it today. The Mercedes has been much more consistent, but I definitely don't think it's the fastest car. And the Ferrari is a bit of an enigma to me right now as to exactly where it sits. It may be very strong, but we've not seen quite enough evidence of that quite as of yet, I would say. So tomorrow I think it's going to be quite critical for a lot of these teams as always. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.